October 23, 1932, 11:42 p.m. The Platinum Club, Chicago. The smell of rain-soaked asphalt and cheap cigars clung to the air like a second skin. Outside the Platinum Club, the neon sign flickered, casting a rhythmic, sickly blue glow over the sidewalk. Bonnie Parker stood under the awning, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. She smoothed her skirt, her fingers trembling slightly not from fear, but from the cold bite of the Chicago wind. She was waiting. Inside, the muffled sound of a jazz trumpet wailed, a lonely, desperate sound that matched the city's mood. The doorman, a mountain of a man named Silas, with a neck wider than Bonnie's waist, leaned against the heavy oak door. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering with a sneer that felt like a physical slap. "We don't serve your kind here, sweetheart," Silas spat, his voice a low rumble of gravel. "Go back to the gutter before you stay in the sidewalk." Bonnie didn't flinch. She reached for a cigarette, but Silas knocked the brass lighter from her hand. It hit the ground with a sharp clink. "I said move," he growled. He didn't know that 3 blocks away, a Ford V8 was screaming through the streets, its tires biting into the corners. He didn't know that the man behind the wheel didn't believe in moving. The sound wasn't the lighter this time. It was the sliding bolt of a Browning automatic rifle. The Ford screeched to a halt, the headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. Clyde Barrow stepped out. He didn't look like a legend yet. He looked like a ghost in a sharp suit. He didn't say a word. He just leveled the barrel of the shotgun at Silas's chest. The doorman's face drained of color, his bravado evaporating into the humid night air. "She's with me," Clyde said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And you're about to be with the devil." To understand how a Texas farm boy and a waitress from Rowena became the nightmare of every lawman in mid-America, we'd have to go back to the moment the world decided they weren't worth a damn. 3 years earlier, Dallas, Texas. The sun in Dallas didn't shine. It punished. It was the height of the Great Depression, and the horizon was a permanent shade of bruised brown. Bonnie Parker spent her days at Marco's Cafe, pouring coffee for men whose eyes were as empty as their wallets. She was 20, married to a man in prison, and bored to the point of madness. She wrote poetry in the margins of napkins, dreaming of a life that didn't smell like grease and failure. Then came Clyde. He wasn't tall, and he wasn't particularly handsome, but he had a nervous energy that felt like electricity. He walked into the cafe on a Tuesday, carrying the weight of a dozen petty thefts and a stint in the Eastern prison farm that had broken something deep inside him. When their eyes met, it wasn't romance. It was a recognition of 2 drowning people finding a life raft. "You look like you're waiting for a train that's never coming," Clyde said, sliding into a booth. "I'm waiting for something to happen," Bonnie replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Clyde leaned in, the scent of gasoline and cheap peppermint surrounding him. He showed her a roll of Bilsmore money than she'd seen in a year. "I make things happen, Bonnie, but it's a fast ride. You don't get off once we start." The decision was made in a heartbeat. She wasn't choosing a man. She was choosing an escape from the grey nothingness of her life. They left Dallas that night, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror like dying embers. But the road ahead wasn't paved with gold. It was paved with the blood of the people who'd tried to stop them. Their first mistake was thinking they could outrun their own shadows. April 30th, 1932, Hillsboro, Texas. The heist was supposed to be simple. A jewelry store, a distracted clerk, and a clean getaway. But the universe has a way of twisting simple plans into knots. The air was thick with the scent of blooming magnolias, a cruel contrast to the tension inside the car. Clyde's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "Stay in the car, Bonnie," he whispered. But things went south within seconds. A shout, the sound of breaking glass, and then boom! A gunshot echoed through the quiet street, shattering the afternoon peace. Clyde ran out, clutching a bag of low-grade diamonds, followed by the store owner, J.N. Bucker. Bucker wasn't a hero. He was just a man trying to protect his livelihood. He didn't see the desperation in Clyde's eyes until it was too late. Clyde fired. The sound was deafening in the narrow alleyway. Bucker crumpled, his blood staining the white dust of the Texas road. This wasn't a movie. There was no music, just the sound of Bonnie screaming as Clyde threw the car into gear. "You killed him, Clyde. You killed him." "I too," he roared, the car fishtailing as they sped away. That was the moment the line was crossed. They weren't just thieves anymore. They were killers. The law, which had previously viewed them as a nuisance, now viewed them as a disease. The theme of their lives had shifted from freedom to survival, and survival in the 1930s was an expensive commodity. The price was their souls. June 1932, a hideout in Joplin, Missouri. The newspapers loved them. In a world where everyone felt crushed by the government and the banks, Bonnie and Clyde were becoming folk heroes. They were the Robin Hoods of the Dust Bowl, even though they never gave a dime to the poor. Bonnie fueled the fire. She sent poems and photos to the press, images of her holding a cigar and a shotgun, looking like a noir queen. "Huh, look at this, Clyde!" she laughed, spreading the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on the crate they used as a table. "They call us the terror of the plains. Terror doesn't pay the rent," Clyde muttered, cleaning his rifle. He was becoming paranoid. Every crick of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind in the trees, sounded like a deputy's footsteps. They were living in a cramped apartment above a garage. The air was stale, smelling of oil and unwashed laundry. They were trapped in their own fame. The more the public loved them, the harder the police hunted them. They were a brand now, and brands have a way of consuming the people who create them. The tension was reaching a breaking point. One night, a neighbor, suspicious of the fancy car and the late-night movements, called the local sheriff. The legend was about to meet the reality of a 12-gauge shotgun. April 13, 1933, 4 p.m. The peace of the afternoon was shattered by the roar of two police cars pulling into the driveway. Clyde saw them first. He didn't hesitate. "Get the guns," he yelled, his voice cracking. The apartment turned into a kill zone. Bullets ripped through the walls, sending splinters of wood flying like shrapnel. Bonnie dived under the bed, clutching her camera, while Clyde and his brother Buck returned fire from the windows. The sound was rhythmic, pop, pop, banger, deadly percussion that lasted only minutes but felt like hours. Two officers, Harry McGinnis and J.W. Harriman, fell in the driveway. Their blood pooled on the concrete, reflecting the Missouri sky. The Barrow gang managed to scramble into their car, tires screaming as they backed through the police line, lead raining down on them from all sides. They escaped, but they left behind everything: their clothes, Bonnie's poems, and most importantly, the film rolls that would immortalize them. When the police developed the photos, they found the famous image of Bonnie with the cigar. The world saw a rebel. The police saw a target. "We can't go back," Clyde said as they hit the open highway, his arm bleeding from a graze. "There's no back anymore." November 1933, the back roads of Louisiana. They were tired. The glamour had worn off, replaced by the grinding reality of life on the run. They slept in cars, bathed in cold creeks, and ate canned beans with their fingers. Bonnie's leg had been horribly burned in a car accident weeks earlier, and she moved with a painful limp. The queen of the outlaws was now a woman in constant agony, fueled only by whiskey and her devotion to a man who was destined for a grave. Hierarchies in the criminal world were shifting. Other gangs were being caught or killed. The FBI, led by a young and hungry J. Edgar Hoover, was making Bonnie and Clyde public enemy number one. "Why don't we just head for Mexico?" Bonnie asked one night, her voice a fragile whisper. "Because they're waiting for us at the border," Clyde replied, staring out at the dark woods. "They're waiting everywhere, Bonnie." The strategy was changing. They weren't just hitting gas stations anymore. They were breaking their friends out of prison. They attacked the Eastern Prison Farm, the very place that had broken Clyde. It was an act of war against the state. But every war has its casualties, and Clyde was running out of allies. He needed a win, but all he found was a trap. February 10th, 1934, 2:15 a.m., a dimly lit office, Austin, Texas. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old parchment and gun oil. Frank Hammer sat behind a mahogany desk, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark omen. He wasn't a man of many words. He was a man of results. A retired Texas Ranger, Hammer looked as if he had been carved out of the very limestone of the Texas hills. He had survived 52 gunfights and carried the lead of 17 bullets in his body. To him, Bonnie and Clyde weren't folk heroes or romantic rebels. They were mad dogs, and he was the dog catcher. "I don't need a badge to find them," Hammer said, his voice a low, his vibrating rumble that made the younger officers in the room shift uncomfortably. "I just need to think like a ghost. They've been running for 2 years because they're playing a game of speed. I'm going to play a game of patience." Hammer didn't use flashy sirens or loud press conferences. He began his hunt by studying the dust. He spent weeks tracing their tire tracks across 5 states, realizing that the Barrow gang followed a predictable, almost ritualistic pattern. They were creatures of habit, tethered to their families by a twisted sense of loyalty. They'd always circled back to the slums of Dallas or the piney woods of Louisiana. They were like wolves with a defined territory, and Hammer was the wolf killer who knew exactly where the watering holes were. He began putting a slow, agonizing squeeze on their network. He didn't just arrest people, he destroyed their will to help. He visited their mothers, their cousins, and their former cellmates, leaving behind a trail of fear. He cut off their supply lines, making it impossible for them to buy ammunition or medicine for Bonnie's failing health. The legend was being suffocated in its sleep. While Bonnie was writing poetry about their inevitable end, Hammer was building the cage that would ensure it happened. He knew that in the criminal world, loyalty has a shelf life, and the expiration date was fast approaching. Every man has a price, Hammer thought, staring at a map of the Louisiana bayous. I just have to find the man who's ready to sell. May 21st, 1934, the edge of Black Lake, Louisiana. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on the swamps of Benneville Parish. The pressure Hammer had exerted finally found the crack he was looking for. Henry Methvin, a young, volatile member of the gang, had become a liability. But it wasn't Henry who broke. It was his father, Ivy. Ivy Methvin was a man of the soil, terrified that his son's association with Clyde Barrow would lead him straight to the electric chair at Angola. Hammer met Ivy in the darkness of a forest clearing. The fireflies were the only light, flickering like dying stars. "Help us catch them," Hammer whispered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his Stetson. "And Henry walks. He gets a full pardon for every crime he committed with that gang. His life for theirs, Ivy. It's a simple trade." It was a cold, calculated transaction. Blood for freedom, Ivy agreed. He knew that Clyde trusted him, and that trust would be the weapon that killed him. On the morning of May 23rd, the plan was set in motion. Ivy parked his old, beat-up truck on the shoulder of Highway 154, a lonely stretch of road surrounded by dense brush. He removed one of the wheels, propping the axle up on a jack to look like he had a flat tire. He knew Clyde's nature. Clyde was a killer, but he was a man who would never pass a friend in trouble. Hidden in the thicket across the road, Hammer and 5 other lawmen, Ted Hinton, Bob Alcorn, Henderson, Jordan, Prentice Oakley, and B.M. Galtley, in wait. They had been there for hours, plagued by mosquitoes and the stifling heat. They were armed with Remington Model 8 semi-automatic rifles and Browning automatics. They weren't there to read rights or make an arrest. They were there to perform a state-sanctioned execution. The air was silent, save for the buzzing of flies. The scent of pine needles mixed with the metallic tang of gun oil. "Don't fire until I give the word," Hammer commanded, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the heat waves danced. "And when you start, don't stop until the car is quiet." May 23rd, 1934, 9:15 a.m. Sales, Louisiana. This sound came first, the high-pitched whine of a Ford V8 engine pushed to its limit. Then, a speck of dust appeared on the horizon, growing into a roaring machine of steel and glass. Clyde was at the wheel, his sleeves rolled up, enjoying the morning breeze. Bonnie was in the passenger seat, wearing a red dress, leaning back with a half-eaten sandwich in her lap. For a moment, they looked like any other couple on a Sunday drive. Then, Clyde saw Ivy's truck. He slowed the Ford down, the gravel crunching under the tires. He pulled up right alongside the broken vehicle, his guard completely down. "Hey, Ivy, you need a hand?" he started to shout. In that split second, the world went silent. Ivy, Methvin, didn't answer. He dived under his truck, disappearing into the shadows. Frank Hammer stood up from the brush, a towering silhouette of death. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Prentice Oakley fired the first shot, a high-powered rifle round that struck Clyde in the temple. The outlaw's head snapped back. He was dead before his foot left the clutch. Then, hell opened up. The volley of gunfire was so loud it was heard by farmers miles away. 6 men emptied their weapons, rifles, shotguns, and pistols into the side of the car in a continuous, deafening roar. The steel of the Ford was chewed to pieces by lead. Glass shattered into a million diamonds that rained over the dying lovers. Bonnie's screams were cut short as the bullets tore through the door and into her small frame. The car, still in gear, began to roll slowly into a ditch, the engine sputtering and dying. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 130 to 167 rounds had been fired into the vehicle. The smell of cordite, gasoline, and copper filled the morning air. When the smoke cleared, the lawman approached the car. Bonnie and Clyde were slumped against each other, their bodies riddled with holes, looking like broken dolls. The fast ride had come to a dead, bloody stop in the Louisiana dirt. Clyde's hand was still near the gear shift. Bonnie's head rested on his shoulder. They had lived by the gun, and they had died by a firing squad of men who didn't believe in legends. The news of the ambush traveled like a wildfire across a dry prairie. Within hours, Highway 154 was no longer a crime scene. It was a pilgrimage site. Thousands of people descended on the area before the bodies were even cold. It was a macabre circus. People dipped their handkerchiefs in the blood pooling on the floorboards. One man tried to cut off Clyde's ear as a trophy. A woman was caught trying to snip a lock of Bonnie's bloody hair with a pair of embroidery scissors. The legend had officially turned into a commodity. Bonnie and Clyde had left a written request to be buried side by side, a final romantic gesture for the Romeo and Juliet of the Dust Bowl. But the world they left behind wasn't interested in romance. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, refused. "He had her in life," she cried. "He's not having her in death." They were buried in separate cemeteries in Dallas. Thousands of people attended their funerals, more people than had ever cared if they were hungry or cold during their years on the run. Bonnie's headstone was inscribed with a poem, a soft ending for a woman who died with a submachine gun at her feet. Today, the death car sits in a casino in Primm, Nevada. It's a rusted, bullet-riddled monument to a pair of outlaws who chose a short, violent life over a long, invisible one. Looking at the holes in the steel, you don't see the glamour. You see the terror. You see two people who thought they could beat a system that had already forgotten them. They became a legend, but as Frank Hammer would tell you, legends are just stories we tell to make sense of the carnage. The truth is simpler. There were two kids from the slums who ran until they ran out of road. Their names are etched in history, but their souls were spent long before they reached that highway in Louisiana. The legend promised them freedom, but the reality gave them a ditch. Was the price of being remembered worth the blood on the asphalt? If you were standing at that crossroads in 1932, looking at a life of poverty or a life of crime, would you have stayed in the cafe, or would you have gotten in the car? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Would you have betrayed them for a pardon? Like and subscribe to keep the history alive. Next time, we go deeper into the shadows.